Welcome to Jurassic Park.
George, please.
Welcome to the Great Drum Experiment. And this is where we ended up. A beautiful studio called Angelic, with an equally handsome drummer called Mike Mallion. The challenge set by Sonnox meant I finally got to answer some questions I've been wondering for years. What does the room actually do to drums? What else changes? Do close mics end up sounding different? Do baffles matter? Can I make two rooms sound like each other? And then, how do I prove it? So, in the middle of setting up one of the rooms, I stood and did a big, long think about how to showcase these questions. I shared my thoughts with Mike, even though I think he might have just been humouring my rambles, and then we got to work setting up the first space. The best way of doing this was to set up 3 fairly different rooms, or as much as I could within the studio. This consisted of having the largest drum room without baffles to try and make it as ambient and reverberant as possible, then bring baffles in and then transport the exact same setup, mic for mic, over to the smaller drum room. So this is what we did. My expectations were that I was going to hear some drastic changes, but I didn't know where they would be. I didn't know if they would be in the close mics or just in the room mics. What I thought I was going to hear, though, that I didn't end up hearing was this. The close mics didn't actually change. Why is that? One answer could be that I didn't pick drastic enough room differences, but I don't think that's the case because we went from a very, very large room to a medium, smallish size room that you can see here. What I'd expected to hear was more influence from the room, so the bleed to change or the ambience to change. So what we've got here in front of us is the session. We've got setup 1, which is the main room with no baffles. Setup 2, which is room number 1 but with baffles. And then setup number 3, which is room number 2, the small room. Now if we want to focus on whether the close mics are changing, let's have a look at the toms. I've got drum gate active on all of the microphones here, but what we can hear at the moment with it on, the close mic tone is not changing at all. And with turning it off, the bleed does not seem to be changing at all across the 3 different setups. Let's take a look if it's happening with snare as well. We've got drum gate on this as well, using my normal preset, which I will be making available to all of you. But listening across these 3 performances again, the close mic signal is not changing again. Let's see if the bleed changes when we turn off drum gate. No, there doesn't seem to be any apparent change in bleed. So, what we're learning here is, in these performances with these rooms, the rooms are not having an effect on the close mics as far as we can tell from these performances. There's not really much in it. Although there are some small tuning shifts, the bleed is relatively the same. With the rooms not changing the close mic signals that much, that brings me on to what do baffles actually do. I've worked in a lot of studios now, and I've always just defaulted to putting baffles up. It was just the done thing. This was something that I'd learned right from the word go when I first ever stepped into a drum room. However, I'd never actually challenged myself on discovering what was actually happening. Let's first listen to room number 1 with no baffles. And now, with baffles. So what did you hear? The first one is huge. It's more like a reverb. It's less defined and it's a lot harder to place, especially if you pop headphones on, in 3D space where things are sat inside the room. And as soon as the baffles come into play, the reverb shortens down. That's to be expected, but what I hear is the fundamental, so this is the core tone of each drum shell, becomes solidified. It becomes very, very tight, and it's very easy to tell where in the room that sound is happening. which is really useful, especially when thinking about how this would work in a composition. You might want one setup for a verse or a bridge and then go bigger for the chorus. Now we know the difference between a very large room without baffles and a very large room with baffles. Things get tighter and more focused. My expectation was to go into the smaller room and it get worse, like trashy, maybe more aggressive, less usable, less exciting. Let's cut between the big room with the baffles and the small room. Do you hear what I hear? What I hear is that there is energy. Regardless of the space, there is energy. There is an attitude here. I wonder if I need to make an exaggerated example of this here, because if we take the small room and then bring samples of the snare of the big room into the mix, how different is it? Okay, we got something really interesting here. Small room aggression, but with the expanse of the snare in the big room. Because I'm really enjoying the energy of the small room, but I was missing some of that length in the snare from the big room. Maybe I like this more? Who knows? It's hard to decide without getting to try this setup with more genres. But I think the takeaway here is the small room works. When a small room is really well put together and the setup is really well done, it works. And if you need a bit of length being brought back to the drums, there is definitely no shame in using samples in order to do that. And speaking of samples, yes, there are samples, and yes, they are free. There is a link in the description down below. Well, you know how that all works. You click the link and then you get them. Not a problem. You get some wicked snares and you get a wicked video. What's not to love? The Ambisonic mic is genius. For those of you unfamiliar with what an Ambisonic mic is and how it does its thing, here's a quick rundown of how this thing works. There are 4 capsules that are arranged in a configuration so that when the 4 signals are processed correctly, they give you a globe of audio. In short, this microphone is designed for Atmos recordings because it captures what feels like a 3D space. If you're on a laptop or on a computer, it will just sound like normal stereo. It will just sound like a room. Pop on some headphones, you'll be able to hear a better approximation of what's going on. So let me just show you what's happening. Hopefully now you can see why I love this mic, especially when using it alongside other stereo pairs of microphones that I would typically use. It seems to fill out the picture and make everything feel complete, which is amazing. Thank you for sticking with me. Thank you for joining me on Nerding Out and discovering what I've gotten to discover. How do I sign off videos?